Power, prestige, bloodlines. For centuries, that was the sacred formula of royalty. But beneath the polished crowns and behind the towering palace walls lurked a secret obsession, one so deep it reshaped generations, the ruthless pursuit of bloodline purity. In the world's most powerful dynasties, love was a luxury and choice, a myth, replaced by duty, strategy, and one chilling rule. Keep it in the family. Cousins married cousins. Uncles took nieces as wives. And as time passed, the consequences began to surface in twisted bodies, fractured minds, and haunting legacies history could no longer ignore. Today, we peel back the curtain on the shocking truth of royal inbreeding, not just how it happened, but what it did to those born into its grip. From grotesque deformities to monarchs who could barely rule, these aren't just historical footnotes, they're tragic warnings. By definition, inbreeding is reproduction between close relatives, siblings, cousins, uncles and nieces. To most of us, it's unthinkable. But for the royal courts of Europe, it was a calculated evil, one they believed was necessary to preserve power, protect thrones, and hoard wealth. What they failed to understand was the cost a genetic time bomb ticking under every crown. Scientifically, it's all about the inbreeding coefficient. A score of 0, no inbreeding. A score of 1, pure genetic duplication. Children of first cousins, that's a 0.0625, a 6.25% genetic overlap. But children of siblings or parent-child unions, a staggering 0.25%, a gamble with fate. And now that we understand the science, let's descend into the histories of monarchs shaped and destroyed by this silent genetic curse. No family embraced inbreeding like the Habsburgs, rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, Austria, and beyond. They weren't just a dynasty, they were a machine, a political juggernaut. But their family tree, it resembled a twisted knot more than a lineage. Uncles married nieces, cousins wed cousins, even double cousins, and with every generation, their bloodline grew dangerously dense. The price? A grotesque deformity that became their signature. The Habsburg jaw, a jutting, oversized lower jaw that didn't just look unnatural, it made chewing painful, speech garbled, and life difficult. No one bore the cost more tragically than King Charles II of Spain. Born from an uncle-niece union, Charles had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.25. His DNA was so compromised, he might as well have been the child of siblings. His body showed it. His mind suffered it. He came into the world with a misshapen skull and an enormous tongue that made speech nearly impossible. He couldn't walk without help until he was 8. He didn't speak until 4. Learning disabilities, chronic illness, disfigurement, he was cursed in life, not by witches, as some whispered, but by his blood. Measles, rubella, smallpox, they ravaged him. Doctors suspected kidney and hormonal disorders. He never fathered an heir. Some believe he couldn't. They called him Charles the Bewitched, convinced he was cursed by black magic. But the truth was far more terrifying. It was biology. Even in death, his body told a gruesome tale. A heart shriveled to the size of a peppercorn, decaying organs, a single blackened testicle, and a swollen brain. His death didn't just end his life, it ended the Spanish Habsburg line. Now, meet Don Carlos, the only son of King Philip II of Spain and Maria of Portugal. His life was a walking tragedy, a portrait of collapse. Thanks to generations of intermarriage, Don Carlos had just 4 great-grandparents, half the normal number. His body paid the price, limbs twisted, legs of unequal length, and a mind plagued with instability. From childhood, his behavior raised alarms. Violent, paranoid, cruel. He once forced a servant to eat feces. He beat animals to death. After suffering a head injury, doctors performed trepanation, a barbaric act of drilling into his skull to relieve pressure. It failed. He spiraled further. He mutilated himself. He attacked his own half-brother, Don John of Austria. He plotted rebellion, planning to flee to the Netherlands and join enemies of the crown. For King Philip, it was too much. He ordered the arrest of his own son. Don Carlos was locked away, a prince imprisoned not by politics, but by the devastating legacy of bloodline obsession. Constant surveillance, stripped of all tools, glass or sharp objects. Within 6 months, he had wasted away either by illness, starvation, or poison. He died at just 23. Lee. In the grand courts of Imperial Vienna, where military marches echoed and ministers debated beneath vaulted frescoed ceilings, one figure stood quietly apart, a man destined for power but imprisoned by his blood. Ferdinand I of Austria. Born in 1793, Ferdinand came into the world not as a beacon of strength, but as a fragile heir, the living result of centuries of genetic entanglement. His parents were double first cousins, a union that looked noble on paper, but handed him a body riddled with biological sabotage. From infancy, the signs were devastatingly clear. He suffered from hydrochilus, a condition that caused fluid to swell inside his skull, warping his head, inflicting pain, and building pressure with every heartbeat. He was plagued by violent epileptic seizures, sudden, unrelenting, and multiple times a day. His speech, slurred. His movements, strained. Even opening a door or stepping forward demanded superhuman effort. Yet, Ferdinand defied assumptions. He was not dull, not empty. In quiet moments, he stunned those around him with a razor-sharp wit, an astonishing memory, and a deep love for science, nature, art, and language. He spoke 5. His journals revealed a man whose mind soared, even as his body failed him, a man curious about the world he could barely touch. But this was an era when monarchy meant power, not sentiment. His visible disabilities became a political liability, so when he was crowned Emperor of Austria in 1835, it was an illusion. The real reins of power slipped into the hands of Prince Metternich and a ruling council. Ferdinand wore the crown, but never wielded it. His marriage to Maria Anna of Sardinia, a relative and royal match, was more caretaking than romance. There were no children. His condition rendered intimacy nearly impossible. Together, they lived in quiet companionship, not in grandeur, but in isolation from a world that had crowned him and then cast him aside. When revolutions erupted across Europe in 1848, the empire braced for resistance, but not from Ferdinand. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He simply stepped down and, perhaps for the first time in his life, finally found peace. In retirement, Ferdinand lived a life many envied. In Prague, he wandered the streets handing sweets to children. The people didn't call him a failure. They called him Ferdinand, the benign, gentle, kind, innocent. He wasn't blamed for the empire's failures. He was pitied, even loved. When he died in 1875, at the age of 82, it was a quiet end to a turbulent life. A life with no wars, no heirs, no reforms. Yet his existence remains a moving testament to the invisible weight of royal blood, how it could lift thrones and crush lives in equal measure. But perhaps no monarch carried the emotional wounds of royal obsession deeper than Maria of Portugal, the first woman to ever rule the nation in her own right. Her story began with promise and ended in whispers, sorrow, and madness. Born in 1734 into the House of Braganza, Maria's veins ran thick with the interwoven strands of Habsburg ancestry and other royal ties. Her family tree was less a line, more a web tangled with secrecy and genetic fragility. She was married to her father's younger brother, Pedro III, not for passion, not for choice, but for dynasty, for control. It was a union designed to keep the throne secure, but it offered little protection to the people inside it. And yet, they found affection. Their bond was quiet, but real. They had 7 children, but the joy was fragile. Most died in infancy. Each stillbirth a silent scream from the family's cursed bloodline. From an early age, Maria was deeply religious, almost mystically so. When the catastrophic Lisbon earthquake of 1755 leveled the city and crushed churches during Mass, killing thousands, she saw it not as nature but as divine wrath. That guilt? It never left her. As queen, Maria was a paradox, both compassionate and strict. She rebuilt Lisbon, reformed her court, and pursued peace. But when Pedro III died in 1786, her mind began to fracture. Then came tragedy in succession, her eldest son, a daughter, and then a beloved grandson, all gone. The grief was too much. Her world, once held together by duty and prayer, began to collapse inward. Despair. Maria's breakdowns were no longer whispers behind velvet curtains. They erupted into full view. She began hearing voices, believed herself cursed, and in a terrifying spectacle reportedly screamed during court functions, claiming she was burning in hell. Music and laughter vanished from the palace. The sound of joy became forbidden. State events turned into hollow, joyless ceremonies as the Queen's private torment seeped into every corner of her rule. Physicians of the era tried everything: ice baths, confinement, enemas, even straitjackets, desperate measures that today read more like instruments of torment than treatment. Diagnosed with religious mania, she was quietly removed from power in 1792, replaced by her surviving son who ruled in her name, while her pain lingered in silence. But her suffering was far from over. When Napoleon stormed into Portugal, the royal family fled across the ocean to Brazil. During the evacuation, Maria reportedly screamed in terror, convinced she was being kidnapped. In exile, isolated from her homeland, and imprisoned within her own crumbling mind, she earned the name the world would remember her by: Maria the Mad. Her final years were spent in a convent, tended to by nuns, far from the country she once ruled, far from the throne that had demanded so much. She died in 1816. Her body faded into stillness, but her story, it still echoes, with the pain of duty, dynasty, and the deepest personal tragedy. These royal lives were never meant to suffer. They were meant to dazzle, gilded in silk, adorned in jewels, elevated by authority. But beneath the crown, behind the marble pillars and golden thrones, often stood a soul fractured by biology, burdened by expectation, and trapped by centuries of misguided tradition. Inbreeding wasn't seen as cruelty, it was seen as necessity. But generation after generation paid the price, a price written in malformed bodies, stunted minds, unrelenting paranoia, seizures, sorrow, and, too often, madness. Each monarch we've explored, Charles II, Don Carlos, Ferdinand, Maria, was more than a list of symptoms. They were human, complex, sometimes kind, sometimes terrifying. Tragic figures shaped by choices they never got to make. And while history remembers their crowns, perhaps now, it's time we remember their humanity. Because in the end, they didn't just inherit kingdoms, they inherited the cost of them